Let's get the insights now of analyst Richard Heydarian on U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to the Philippines. Richard, you heard your fellow political analysts talk about the EDCA, and of course, the president has emphasized and reiterated that he wants an independent foreign policy. So, should the EDCA be scrapped or retained?
Well, I think that issue is, I don't know how expert these experts really are. I mean, as far as the EDCA is concerned, this was already cleared by the Philippine Supreme Court. This was already cleared at the highest level as far as our judicial authorities are concerned. So this is clearly in consonance with our Constitution. It's also a derivative of the Mutual Defense Treaty between the Philippines and United States. And by the way, the whole point behind EDCA was to make sure that the Philippines treaty with the United States is something that is going to be useful to us in light of disputes in the South China Sea. I'm 100% for Philippine independence. I'm 100% for us standing up for ourselves. The question, however, is can we stand up on our own alone against a geopolitical giant like China as far as the South China Sea is concerned? That is why you have an alliance. That is why countries like Japan and South Korea, in fact, even have U.S. bases in their country, because they acknowledge that on their own alone, they cannot really face major challenges in the region, including the 21st century. That's why some of our neighbors are actually strengthening their alliance with the United States. So my problem is that when you talk about independence and then you downplay the alliance, then my question to them is, then what is your solution to what China is doing to us in the South China Sea, in the West Philippine Sea over the past decades, right? Otherwise, you're actually asking for trouble. Otherwise, you're asking essentially for China to be able to easily dominate this part of the world, because the Philippines still doesn't have even the minimum deterrence capability to push back against the Americans. So again, if you want an independent Philippines, build our capabilities, also make the most out of our alliance. And as far as EDCA is concerned, this has been already cleared as far as its constitutionality is concerned. So I find some of the legal arguments actually questionable and moot and academic.
All right, so EDCA is here to stay for Richard Heydarian. So when President Marcos visits China in early January, what does he offer to the mainland? What does he offer to Xi Jinping?
Yeah, so far Marcos is picking up, the low-hanging fruits, right? So on one hand, of course, he's continuing President Duterte's friendly rhetoric, at least towards China, not as subservient, but friendly rhetoric talking about a new golden age. But what a difference a few months can make in terms of geopolitics, right? Over the past 3 months, we see a flurry of meetings between our new president, Marcos Jr., and top American officials. So you had Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, visiting the Philippines in August. Now you have the U.S. Vice President visiting. You had the top meeting between our defense chief and the American defense chief in Hawaii, Honolulu, earlier this year. And of course, at least 2 in-person meetings between Marcos and President Joseph Biden of the United States. So this is a dramatic shift from what we saw under President Duterte, not to mention, from what I understand, there's going to be more than symbolic revitalization of bilateral ties. So joint military exercises next year will go from 300 to 500, more than any other U.S. ally in this part of the world. Balikatan could feature as many as 15,000 troops from the 2 countries. And not to mention, of course, Rico, I mean, what makes the Philippines very important to the U.S. right now is not only the South China Sea issue, which, by the way, is also important to us, but it's the Taiwan issue. So if you look at the EDCA right now, originally we were looking at granting Americans rotational access, not permanent base access. That will be unconstitutional. Rotational access to up to 5 bases. Now the conversation is maybe up to 10 bases will be opened up, including new ones, as your report has suggested, in places like Cagayan, Isabela, northern parts of the Philippines, which are very close to Taiwan. So the Philippines is extremely crucial to the United States. And that explains why they're so nice to Marcos. They're not raising really much of criticism on Philippines' human rights, or good governance, baggage of the Marcoses, etc., because they're just really zeroing on in terms of preparing the alliance for contingencies in both Taiwan and the South China Sea.
But for the Chinese, for Xi Jinping, what will he ask from President Marcos with this EDCA in place?
Yeah, I mean that's where I was heading, Rico, which is, it's great to talk about new era of golden relations with China, but China is definitely looking at this in a very worried fashion. I'm sure they're wondering how far can Marcos go in terms of its kind of a multi-vector, balancing strategy, because you cannot tell China that we want a new golden age and at the same time make the alliance with the United States more robust than ever, with implications both for China's plans in the Taiwan Strait as well as the South China Sea. So that's why I'm sure that President Marcos will try to continue to downplay this massive revitalization of defense ties with the United States. At the same time, I think Marcos will continue to emphasize that diplomacy is his number one preferred approach. But the reality is this: you cannot say, we're friends to everyone and enemy to none when other countries are actually threatening your interest. And more than that, Rico, we cannot be purely neutral. We already have an alliance. The moment you have an alliance, you cannot really be neutral. Allies cannot be neutral. That's just the legal and geopolitical reality of our situation with America. So for now, rhetorically, you can keep on saying we're neutral, we're independent, etc. But the reality is really 50 shades of dilemmas, strategic dilemmas for the Philippines. And I think down the road, Marcos will have a much harder time trying to convince both China and the United States that he's a reliable partner.
A tight balancing act indeed for the president on foreign policy. Thank you so much for your insights, political analyst Richard Heydarian.